Welcome, and welcome to your meditation during this guided meditation time. One of the strong associations, I believe, with mindfulness meditation, and often how I teach, is that mindfulness is a non-reactive awareness that doesn't add anything to the experience, just is present for our experience as it is. And that when we practice that way, then we're not allowed to change anything. We're not allowed to think about anything, um, something like that. But in fact, this mindfulness practice, as a Buddhist practice, sometimes it's useful to think of it as a strategy. And we're using the best strategy we have, we know of, to become free, to become liberated. And sometimes we practice non-reactive awareness, and that's really, really valuable, invaluable. Sometimes we practice not adding anything or projecting anything onto experience, no stories. But sometimes we do. Sometimes it's strategic, it's useful to change our experience. Sometimes it's useful to have stories that we tell ourselves. Sometimes it's useful to interpret our experience in ways that support the strategy of being able to be here, present, alive, and be free. So this week I'm talking about wise thinking. And often, I believe, for many human beings, thinking goes unexamined, unconsidered. We just think what we think, and we might be troubled by it, we might be involved in it. It just kind of goes along on its own merry way, and we're kind of the participants of it. And but if we're living a mindful life and a deliberate life, we don't just let our thinking go in overdrive, go in automatic pilot. We can actually engage it in a useful way, in a strategic way. The Buddha said that a watched mind brings happiness. If we don't watch our mind and the mind goes on automatic pilot, that can often be a recipe for suffering. So here we are to wake up, to be present, to see, be wise, watch the mind, but also to engage the mind in a useful way. So in relationship to thinking, we can think in ways that support this path. We can think in ways that helps the mind get quieter, stiller, more focused, more non-reactive to our experience. Thinking can be part of our support system for all this. And one way that happens is in preparation for really settling into the heart of meditation. When we first sit down, we could notice how we're thinking. We could think in wiser ways. We can tell stories in wiser ways. We can imagine in ways that support us, use the imagination. So that's what we'll do today. And in this week of the wise use of thinking in meditation. So to assume a meditation posture, and without much other preparation now, gently close your eyes. And to whatever ability you have to imagine or to tell yourself a story, imagine that you are sitting in the room or the place where you're sitting to meditate. Begin a story that says, in this story, I'm sitting in this room in my meditation posture, and then imagine that, or tell the story of here you are, and you're checking in with yourself. Imagine that you're a person who's thinking. And notice, are you thinking thoughts that you're happy to have? And gently tell yourself the story of yourself sitting here meditating. And the way to do that, one way to do it, is gently give yourself instructions in meditation. Rather than relying on me to do it, guided meditation. Gently, calmly instruct yourself. Use your thoughts to think thoughts of instruction. And we'll do that for a few minutes silently. And if you have a story, unconscious, subconscious, automatic story of what it's like for you to be practicing, what it's like to give yourself instructions, what your current circumstances are like, and if that story distracts you, tell yourself a different story. Tell yourself the story that of now, here, meditating. Tell yourself the story, the experience of what it's like to be in your body, breathing. Maybe narrating it as if someone's listening to this account. As you're sitting here, tell the story, give the explanation to yourself of how sitting, meditating can be helpful for you, supportive. Perhaps explaining it to yourself with a voice that's calm, supportive, kind. Here, let me tell you. This is what this meditation is about now. This is what I'm trying to do because I care. I care about myself. I care about you, speaking to yourself. Gently, quietly, as an alternative to other stories and habitual ways of thinking. And gently give yourself relaxing instruction. At the end of the inhale, relax. At the end of a thought, relax. Let there be a ongoing, relaxed, clear, intentional instruction. Maybe just with even the single word, relax. If your mind is easily distracted, tell yourself the story about being distracted. Tell it to yourself in a quiet, calm, peaceful voice. And as you tell yourself the story of being distracted or starting to be collected, the story of whatever your experience is, at the end of each sentence, point yourself to the quiet and stillness that's here, the silence at the end of a thought. And when the mind gets distracted again, deliberately bring in different thoughts, the thoughts about meditating and what you're doing and the goodness of it. And let each of those thoughts point back to the stillness, the silence, If any thoughts come up that undermine you, that somehow are critical or fear-producing or any ones that are unpleasant to have, substitute them with deliberate, realistic thoughts, supportive thoughts about doing the meditation in a way that points to a quiet intimacy of breathing mindfully, that does so with a positive regard for yourself, for the practice, and for whatever your experience is. Kind regard for all things. If you find yourself distracted, don't simply let go of your distractions. Offer a reframing of whatever you're thinking about. It can be as simple as adding, "Not now. This is not the time to have these thoughts." Or, "It's not so." Or if your distractions are fantasy, imagination, reframe your interest to being intimate with reality as it is in the present. If the thoughts are negative, reframe those thoughts. In such a way that they don't undermine you. Maybe the simple statement, I see you. I know you, distracted thought. It's okay for you to rest and relax, because right now I'm meditating. And consciously you can use a thought that points beyond thinking. The gentle, calm thought, listen, and then listen to the silence where there is no thinking. The thought feel that points you to feeling, not thinking. The thought stillness that points to whatever non-discursive stillness there is here in this body or in this space around you. And then as we come to the end of the sitting, in some way that seems realistic to you, tell yourself a positive, a story of positive regard for yourself. Ideas of how you'd like to support yourself, how meditation is helpful, how taking this time to meditate, even if it was not a good meditation, how it was good to do this. Maybe even having a small smile on your lips, appreciating yourself. And then turning your gaze outward into the world. And if it's nice for you, you can tell a brief story of how our lives are so interdependent on the lives and work and efforts of so many people. We benefit immensely from the unseen labor of people in our neighborhood, in our wider communities, in other countries, the whole world. Reminding yourself of this story of the amazing supportive network that brings us our food, our clothes, all that we need for our life. And then think thoughts of goodwill for all those people whose lives support yours. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could be happy and peaceful and safe? Wouldn't it be wonderful if you were happy, peaceful, and safe? And so all the networks of interconnection we have, all the ways that we share this planet, is filled with mutual kind regard. And may we contribute ours. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be peaceful. And may all beings everywhere be free. Thank you. So, continuing on the theme of wise thinking, in Buddhist practice, all our life is a subject for practice. Everything that we are about is a worthy object for our mindfulness and attention, and that includes the world of thinking. And certainly there's a lot to learn about thinking by being mindful of it. But also the thinking is such an important activity, that a necessary activity for our lives, that we don't have to leave it to chance what we think about. We don't have to let the automatic pilot let us think whatever we think. We don't have to be the victim of our thoughts. And we could think deliberately, things which are supportive and helpful. We can change the currents the river of thinking that we're involved in. We can introduce new things to have filling our mind and all that. This has to be done wisely, so it's not just simply covering how we are, covering it over and kind of creating a happy scenario so that we don't feel our sadness or our grief or our anger and pretend that everything is good and nice. That doesn't work. But we don't have to just kind of go along with whatever our mind gives us in terms of our thinking, our distracted thoughts. We can kind of, in a certain sense, be in charge of our thoughts rather than the thoughts be in charge of us. And so one form of thinking that's quite common is the story-making mind. We're constructing stories. We're constructing scenarios, images, scenes, predictions. If we're planning the future, that's partly a story about what we think is going to happen and how we're going to, what we're going to say and how we're going to behave in the story. If we're remembering the past, it's usually a story about something that happened then, and there's a narrative behind it. Sometimes there's a narrative, a framework around which we tell a story about our present moment. Oh, this is not going to work out. I can't do this. This is hard. This is too hard. Or this is great. I'm wonderful, and I want everyone to appreciate me more and more because of how wonderful I am. There's kind of all this kind of more things going on. And those stories can be elaborate in terms of fantasies and creating huge scenarios. And if those stories are of unfortunate kind of, if they're fear stories, if they're angry stories, if they're despair stories, if they're conceit stories, it kind of creates a mood and affects us in profound ways. It's kind of like there's mood music that comes along with the stories we tell us, and that mood music can depress us or enliven us, can benefit us or close us down. And so to learn how, in just the right way, not too much, it's almost better to do a little bit too little, is to engage in deliberate thought while we meditate, to think wisely, to recognize what we're thinking about and reframe it. So, for example, a lot of the story-making mind, one of the main characters in the story is ourselves. And and sometimes we repeat the same story over and over again, the same memory, the same repeated kind of telling us the story, telling ourselves the conclusion of the story, the implications of the story, over and over again, And if it's debilitating, if it's draining us of our kind of energy, our life vitality, then it's probably not useful to keep telling ourselves that story repeatedly over and over again. And so to take, in a certain way, take responsibility or take control of our own mind, our own thinking, by figuring out how to think in a way that's not debilitating. Think in a different way. Maybe there's ways of thinking about your distracted thoughts, where you tell yourself a different story, where you tell yourself it's not like that. There's another perspective. Sometimes you can tell yourself a reframing of what you're doing. So it could be, for example, you had something difficult that happened to you and you feel really bad about yourself. Then to reframe it. What can I learn from this? How can I be a better person in the future rather than being weighed down by the past? Let me learn from that. What can I learn from that experience? So that's being truthful, honest, and direct and real about what happened. But it's reframing it in a way so that it does something positive for us. We learn something. We learn how to be better because of it. So that's kind of stepping in and whenever something's debilitating, try not to participate in the thoughts that we churn out that are debilitating. Be honest about why we're doing it, what we're feeling, but is there another way of understanding it, another story you can tell ourselves? Like if you're doing Buddhist practice, you can say, well, instead of kind of ruminating about this story over and over again, the story I have is that now I can I can fold this into my practice. I have a practice that helps liberate this. I have a practice that helps bring kindness or gentleness or stillness to this. I have a practice that shields me from the impact of these, because the stronger the mindfulness is, the less the mood music of those stories are going to penetrate into my heart. So telling yourself that story, because those can be true stories, they can actually call upon positive ways of being. And the new stories, the new framework, can be something that brings us a little bit of joy or happiness or relief or confidence. Oh, it can be a different way. So I'm not suggesting we do this all the time, but I am suggesting maybe doing it when it's the better alternative. If we notice that what we're doing is spinning out in our thoughts or pulled into these distractive thoughts, or we've had the same thought, the same story, 1,000 times, then you probably have something better to do. You don't need to do it again. And so to step forward with some sense of agency, some sense of ability to change the currents of your life, some ability of controlling yourself, being a kind of monitoring yourself and taking control over yourself to some degree by engaging in a reframing, a new story that is a better one than the one that's debilitating you. Again, not to make up something, not to invent something, not to project kind of fake, kind of positive regard onto ourselves, to really recognize what's happening and then reframe it for some way that realistically is a much better story, much more interesting. If there's a lot of challenges, for example, I've known people who, when it was reframed for them, that they're learning to practice with this so they can help others who have the same problem, the same challenge. Suddenly they get buoyed up, they get inspired. Oh yes, when it's just focusing on myself, the main subject of my story, I feel more depressed. I feel like one more time it's so hard. But when I think, oh, there's a higher purpose for going through with this, to learn and recognize and practice with this, I'm going to be able to support other people going through it. I'll understand them better. The more I understand myself with my difficulty, the more I'll understand other people with this difficulty. The more I learn to be patient, the more I learn to have insight, the more I learn to practice with it, I can maybe support other people to do the same. And so the main point I'm trying to make today is don't be a victim of your stories. Don't operate on automatic pilot of what you think about through the day, as if you have to, or that just kind of You are your thoughts, and these, or you have no say over what you think. You have to just go along with it, or you believe that every thought you have is true, and so it has to be there. It's not the case. We could have some role in how we think and what we think about. And we can think in ways that are supportive and helpful. And for those of us who are doing Buddhist practice, we have a whole repertoire, a whole set of understandings about what we're doing that's actually quite profound. So to call upon how we understand the practice and how it's beneficial, and how bringing the practice to our difficulties is a reframing of the difficulty. It's inserting or bringing into it a new story, the story of practice, the story of the Buddha story, about how we're going to practice with this and find our liberation from it. Or we're going to sit patiently and not give into it. Maybe we tell ourselves the story of Mara. And Mara's story is that the Mara comes to the Buddha, this temptation, devilish kind of person who's trying to stop the Buddha from being enlightened. And he comes to the Buddha, and the story the Buddha tells is not that he has to fight and battle Mara, but he just looks at him straight in the eye and he says, "Mara, I see you." And that's enough. He's not for or against Mara, he's not criticizing Mara, he says, "Mara, I see you." And to be clearly seen, Mara can't stand that and just disappears, goes away, can't manage. Mara loses his power if he's seen that clearly. So there's Mara's story. You have your challenges, your strong drives and desires and ill wills that come up so powerfully. Tell yourself the story of Mara. You might say the words, "Mara, I see you," and use that to really see what's going on in such clarity that you're not being pulled into the world of your desires and aversions. You're standing out and really seeing, oh, this is what it is. And that, so this is a skill to learn, deliberate thinking, reframing your experience. And certainly it can seem like you're being busy in meditation when you do this. But the idea is to develop this skill, this orientation, so you know when to bring it in because it's supportive. You know when this is the better alternative to do, rather than merely going along in distracted thought. So may you today, as you go through the day, may you find ways to reframe your experience, or to place whatever is happening to you into a different story than the one that you're habitually engaged in or unconsciously engaged in. May your life occur within stories that bring you and others tremendous benefit and freedom. Thank you.